You are looking at the CalCATS login screen on my shared screen. We're going to be using the test system today, which will remain available to you so that you can do experimenting and trying things out without necessarily modifying production data. The production website is at calcats.org. And you'll notice that in the test system, when you're logged in, there's a red interface, whereas the normal CalCATS has a nice blue aqua interface to remind you that you're in the test system. It is a web-based system. I'm going to log in as an administrator in your county. And the data that we're using here is a somewhat old, a couple of months old import of data from your current daily system. You've been using the daily for quite a while now, and so you will be very familiar with a lot of how CalCATS works. That's a little more challenging for other counties that are just being introduced to a program like this. So hopefully you will find a lot of familiarity in how the interface works and how the data is organized. A couple of things to note. The first landing page we arrive at is a general summary of the time that you've entered for the 2-week payroll period. So all of our time periods are broken up into 2 weeks, Sunday to Sunday. And very similar to the header in your daily program, we have a row for each day that tells you how many hours you were expected to work. And then the row below it is how many hours you've entered for that day, with a reddish highlight meaning that you have entered fewer hours than expected, an orange highlight meaning that you've entered more hours than expected, and a green highlight meaning you have entered exactly the number of hours that are expected. And below that, we have an activity summary. So if during this payroll period you had done some ag dailies and some weights and measures inspections and some pesticide use enforcement work, each of those activities would be listed here with the total hours at the bottom for the 2-week period, just to give you a summary of everything that you have in the system. You'll see this construct in several places. It's a payroll period selector. I can scroll left, which goes back in time to earlier time periods, and right to go forward in time to later time periods. And very similar to what we have in the daily, if I wanted to go back and look at my timesheet for, let's say, whatever July 5th was, I can just put in 7/5 for July 5th and hit enter, and that will take me directly to pay period 15, which included Monday, July 5th.
Oh, thank you.
And just like in the daily program, I can hit just put in T, and that will jump me back to today's timesheet. So navigating around in time is fairly easy, far easier than it was for the Doctor in Back to the Future, if you ever watched that movie. So looking at the time and activity dashboard, the next thing I want to do is we'll generally march our way across the menus at the top here. So the next thing I want to look at is my timesheet. And we're going to focus the first half hour, 45 minutes or so, talking about how the timesheet works. This is, regardless of where the time comes in from, this is where the time will end up being aggregated for you in the system. So whether you're entering leave time or direct time or aggregating time from things like your ag daily forms or your weights and measures inspection forms, that time will be reflected on this timesheet. So this is Grand Central Station for making sure at the end of every 2 weeks, all of your time is allocated in the right places and you can submit your timesheet to your supervisor for review and approval. In general, on the screen, we have some controls at the top right here. The first is a timesheet status. The timesheet status moves from in progress, that means you're working on your timesheet, to in review, meaning you've submitted it to your supervisor. And then if your supervisor approves it, it will go to approved status. If it's in review or approved, you will not be able to make any changes to it. So if your supervisors find some things that need to be modified or changed on your time card, they will put it back to in progress status, which will then allow you to make those changes again. Once it's been approved, then it's sort of finalized. It can be taken out of approved status by a supervisor. So it's not locked down for all time. but that indicates two other reporting mechanisms that that time has been approved and is available for doing audit comparisons with the payroll system and that type of thing. We have 3 reports that can be run right from the timesheet. I'm not going to run these now because we have no data in our timesheet. They'll make a lot more sense to you once we have some data. So I will come back around to those 3 buttons a little later. Below that, we have our time navigation control. So you can look at this timesheet or an older timesheet or even potentially a future timesheet. For example, if you know you're taking 2 weeks of vacation next payroll period, you can fill out your timesheet in advance with your vacation time and submit it for review and approval. Below that, in this grayed out area here, we have timesheet hints. So we've spent a lot of time building a lot of functionality into the timesheet to try and make it as easy and quick as possible to navigate around. And as you move around in the timesheet, you'll see some of these boxes here will be grayed out and disabled, meaning that feature is not available in the particular timesheet row that you're working on, and others will light up. So I will explain what those things mean as we navigate through the timesheet. Then below that is the timesheet itself, and timesheets look like timesheets. There's columns for all of the days in the payroll period, and then there's rows for all of the different categories that you can bill time to. At the bottom, you'll see there's a summary, and that summary shows your expected hours, the hours you've entered, and then if you break up time between regular and overtime, then it will give you the split that you have entered between regular time and overtime. And then last thing on the screen is a button to add a timesheet row. I will come back and explain that after we spend a little bit of time navigating around the timesheet, so you have a better understanding of it before we talk about that particular button. So I'm gonna go ahead and click in Monday, December 6th. That was the beginning of this week. And whenever I'm in a timesheet cell and I want to enter time, the hints up here will tell me how to enter that time. And there are 4 different types of rows on the timesheet that have different ways of entering time into them. And the next 15-20 minutes, I will be describing what those 4 different timesheet row entries are and how they work. So the first and simplest is straight entry. And if you look in the top first box in the timesheet hints, that will tell you what type of row it is. In a straight entry row, these are the keys that you can use. You can use the up, down, left, and right arrows. So you'll see I can move around with the keyboard, which is really nice. I like using the keyboard when I'm entering things like this. So it feels more like an Excel spreadsheet than it does sort of, click and type, click and type. You can also use tab. You can use the enter key. You can use the shift tab and shift enter keys. So that will navigate you around the timesheet. The next column is how do you enter time. So to edit time here, you'll see that I can type, which just means start typing a number. So I can type in 3, and that will begin to enter time for Monday, December 6th. As I'm working in the timesheet, you'll see that hints area has responded. So now I'm in the middle of typing something, and it tells me I can save it or cancel it. So save is either the enter key or the tab key, and cancel is the escape key. So if I hit enter here, that record is now saved, and it's been transmitted back to the server. So there's no save button you have to click after you make these changes. We'll delete that entry, and then we'll take a look at some other things. So if I try and type a letter in here, hopefully you could hear me whacking on the keyboard there, it won't let me. So it'll only let you enter valid values. If I try and put in 25 hours in a day, it'll just blank it out. So it won't let you put in an invalid value. I could put in 10 hours and it wouldn't complain about that. That's something that your supervisor would catch when they're reviewing your timesheet. So clearly, normally in here, I would put in 8 hours. Monday wasn't necessarily a holiday, but we'll count it as one. And then for me, when I'm doing, if I know that I took 3 days of sick leave, I'll just put 8 tab, 8 tab, 8 tab. And you can see it's fairly quick to get that data entered, and all of that's being saved back to the server as I make those entries. Okay, so that's really it as far as straight entry goes. You'll see there's no other buttons that are lit up here in the help area except remarks. So we do have the ability for you to add remarks on every time entry, and on a straight entry row like leave, you can either hit the R key, and that will pull up a remarks box where you can start typing, this maybe was approved by Jeremy E on, whatever, 12/8, whatever your county policy is for adding remarks for that type of work. And then again, in trying to help you avoid reaching for the mouse all the time, you can just hit enter and it will save those remarks. You will notice there's a little green highlight in that cell. Again, trying to mimic Excel a little bit here, we use those cell corner highlights to illustrate where you have additional data behind that number. Okay, and then last thing, if I draw your eyes up here again to the help desk, the help row, you can hit R to do remarks, and then there's this weird little icon, right? That's a mouse, and that's the left mouse button, and X2 means double click. So that just means if I prefer using my mouse to using the keyboard, I can double click in there, and it will pull up those remarks and let me edit them. Okay, so I'm going to remove those entries. I don't want to have a whole bunch of sick time on here, so I'll delete my remark, and then I'll delete my time entries. And now we'll move on to the second type of time entry row. So that one is a very simple one. So anytime you're looking at a row and it says mode straight entry, that just means you're entering time straight into the timesheet. Now I'm going to go down to the next type, which you'll notice the mode now has changed to simple entry. So simple is simple, but it's not quite as simple as straight. And you'll see that that edit highlight went away. That means it's telling me I can't type a number directly in here. What I need to do is go to details and either hit Control Enter or double click in that cell. So if I try and type a number, it's not going to let me. And so I either have to double click that cell or hit Control Enter, and now it's going to pull up a little form. So the way the simple time entry works is it's asking you for a little bit more detail about each of the hours that you bill for that day. So for clerical direct time, as you can imagine, if it's direct time, I need to say what it's direct to. So you'll notice again, without touching the mouse, I hit Control Enter and it's already got me into that first selection box. So the first thing I need to select is which program was this for? And I can hit the Tab key and go over to subprogram, and I can say which of the reports the time was direct to. So we'll just put this in as Pest Detection, and then number of hours, we'll do 4 hours. In the test system, we have this expenses column. I do not believe you're tracking expenses in production, so you will not see an expenses column when you're working in your timesheet. That may be something that San Mateo County enables later, but it's not available right now, so you can ignore it. And then if I just hit Tab, it will automatically save that row for me. You'll see in the background, it's updated my timesheet for 4 hours, but it's left this form up here because obviously it's fairly conceivable that this isn't my only clerical direct time for the day. So now we do have to reach for the mouse. So I can click into this next row and I can add another form. So maybe on pest management, I did another 2 hours. So I have a total of 6 hours of clerical direct time. 4 hours of it was on pest detection, 2 hours of it was on pest management. And I'll hit enter to close that dialog, and you'll see on my time card, it's added those up to 6 hours. So that's what simple entry means. Simple entry means there's a very simple form to fill out, but it lets you put in multiple entries for the same day, and you access those entries either by hitting Control Enter, as it says up here in details, or double clicking on that row, and then you can modify or update those time entries. Okay, so that's 2 out of the 4 types of rows. The third type of row is what we call a custom entry. And for that, I'm going to scroll all the way down here to White Garden Snail. Now, on White Garden Snail, again, you'll see in the hint area, it says, okay, I have to go to details in order to enter time. So Control Enter or double click. And now I'll get a form that looks a lot like the simple entry form, but this form is actually designed by your county administrator. So anytime your county, starts a new program, maybe that, we haven't developed a statewide form for yet, or there's some special information that they need to track for a special project, they will create a custom entry form like this. And in addition to program and subprogram, your county administrator, you'll do this, this is a self-service thing, will design some other fields that you need to fill in. So in this case, they want you to fill in a homeowner contact, where I would put in Joe Smith, if I can type. And this would be in, I don't know, and then the program is agriculture, and I can choose a subprogram and put in my hours for the day. Okay, so very similar to the simple entry, but just be aware that if there's a program that requires a lot of extra data, this may not show up as a simple little form like this. It may be a more complex form. But the form itself will tell you which fields are required and what type of data you can put in there, whether it's text or numbers or drop-down lists. So just follow the directions that are on the form, fill out your time, and then it will enter that time on that day. Okay, so I'm going to take out my holiday time because I've got 16 hours on one day, and I don't want to address that just yet. I'll say I took 8 hours of sick leave here, and I'm going to put in a couple of other entries just so you kind of see how familiar or how simple it is to go through and do this. So clerical direct, we've taken a look at that. Clerical indirect is straight entry, so I would just put in 8 hours, and then if I needed to enter remarks, I could put in remarks. I was doing filing. The configuration of these projects is, again, county customizable. So we have some initial categories set up that are very similar to what you have in the daily right now. But as time goes by, if you have questions about whether you should be billing time in clerical direct or clerical indirect or professional support, those will be answers that your county can answer internally. Just look to your supervisor for that guidance. Okay, so I'd mentioned that there are 3 types of rows for entering time. We've looked at the straight entry, which you just type the number into the spreadsheet or into the timesheet and add your remarks. We've looked at simple entry that gives you a short form to fill out to identify the necessary parameters for that category of time entry. And then we've looked at custom entry, where your county can design a custom form to collect additional information. The last type is what we call an activity row, and you'll see there's 3 of them here. There's an ag activity, a pesticide activity, and a weights and measures activity. And if I click in one of those rows, you'll see that it tells me I've got to go to details. And when I go to details, I don't have any way of entering time here. There's no place to click to type in time. And the comment here, it says screen shows time that's been entered on detailed activity forms, and you cannot enter time directly for this row. So what these activity rows are all about is, you're familiar with your Ag Daily forms. Those of you who do weights and measures work are familiar with your weights and measures inspection result forms. And those of you who do PUE work are familiar with the CalCATS inspection and investigation and enforcement forms. The way these activity rows get populated is you put your time in on those activity forms, and then the system automatically transfers that time into your timesheet. So the next part of the training will be going through how to do ag activity dailies, how to do weights and measures inspections, and how to do PUE time entry. And those are quite detailed topics, and it's difficult for us to sort of jump back and forth between that and the timesheet. So before we move on to those, I'm going to show you these 3 reports that I've mentioned. And that way we don't have to keep jumping back and forth. So the first report is a timesheet export. And I'll just run that timesheet export for this timesheet. That will deliver to you an Excel file. And whenever you download an Excel file these days, Windows is very protective of you. And you'll see these weird errors, you know, # name, question mark. You will need to click the enable editing button for this to recalculate the formulas that are in here that drive the display in the sheet. So the timesheet export is designed for you. You might use this as your, I'm not sure actually, Jeremy, if you're going to use these as your printed and signed timesheets, but they're designed to serve that function. We have the payroll period, your HR employee number, if that's been entered on your account, your name, and then a place for you to sign the timesheet, the status where it's, you know, by the time you sign it, it should be an approved status, and then who approved it. So the supervisor's name and a place for the supervisor to sign. Then we have a summary of the 2 weeks at the top, the expected hours, how many regular hours were entered, how many overtime hours were entered, and how many total hours were entered. And then we have a section for week 1 and a section for week 2. You'll see that the categories that show up here are just the categories that I entered time on. So it trims out categories that were not used. And then it shows you the hours per day and the total per day. And if I go to print this, it's set up to print on 2 pages. So the week 1 prints on the first page and week 2 prints on the second page. Okay, so that's the timesheet format. Now we have a second export, which is called the Payroll Report. It's the 3rd button over here, but I'll show it first because what it is, it's the same thing as the timesheet export. But because payroll generally doesn't really care about whether you're doing report 1 or report 2 or white snail or, you know, that's more detail than a payroll system cares about. What they want to know is work time and leave time. So this is the same report, but all of the individual types of categories of work are compressed down into just the codes or the categories that payroll is interested in. Okay, so if you have a payroll report from the payroll system, it's probably going to tell you, you know, you had 16 hours of work time and 8 hours of sick time, and this report will help you compare numbers on that same basis. And then the 3rd report is a very, very useful report. I'll run it here, but then there's actually a place where it's actually more useful for supervisors. But for here, let me expand this so you can read it. This is a report just from my time, just for this payroll period. And it tells me the date, who I am, which category I entered time on. I'll skip over the exclude column because you're not using that feature. The program and sub-program I build it to, if it were a weights and measures category of time, it would tell me the device type and whether it's direct time or support time. If it was attached to a particular contract, it would give me that information, some other classifications that we have, and so on. And then over at the right, we've got the number of hours, miles, and expenses you entered and the remarks that you typed in. So when you're auditing your own time, this is kind of a useful report because it gives you in Excel, and you can use Excel's filtering capabilities and summing capabilities to, you know, check how much time you had in ag versus weights, or how much time you had in pest detection versus pest eradication, and so on. There's also 2 very useful columns that are kind of useful more at the supervisor level, and that is, where is this time going to end up in the annual financial summary? And that's really important for verifying the configuration of the timesheet categories. Not a topic we're going to talk about more today, but just so that those of you who are If you get questions about why time isn't showing up in the right place on these reports, this is a great place to look. And the other is where the time will end up on the CMR. We haven't entered any weights and measures time yet, so that's obviously all none. But on the CMR, there's different places for time to be accrued, and this will tell you where that time is going to go. So very useful report. This button just exports it for your time for the 2-week payroll period. It's also available under the reports menu, where you can run it for multiple people and for a longer time period. Okay, that's it for those reports. And then before we leave the timesheet and we go on to work on ag activities, pesticide use enforcement activities, and weights and measures activities, I want to show you one more feature of the system, which is if you work more than your 8 hours or 7.5 hours or whatever your expected work time is for a day. So if I go into clerical indirect and I put in 10 hours, unless I tell the system otherwise, it's going to assign all 10 of those hours to regular time. Now, one little hint up here that I didn't mention yet is this last one, the time codes hint. So the time codes hint says press the letter T or control click. So I can hold the control button and click in here. I can just press the letter T. And this will now let me subdivide those 10 hours between regular time and whatever categories of overtime your county has set up. And most counties have a couple of different overtime categories, and you should probably already be aware of what your policies are for when you bill overtime and which categories you bill it to. But for simplicity's sake, I'll say I'm going to bill 8 hours of regular time and 2 hours of overtime. And a couple of things happen on the timesheet. First of all, you get a little blue highlight in the top left corner, which, like the green highlight for remarks, the blue highlight is for overtime. And you will see in my summary, it's a total of 10 hours, 8 hours of regular time, 2 hours of overtime. So that is how we go about assigning overtime in the system. And I think that's enough said there, unless, Jeremy, you think there's any other coverage we should apply that to that.
I think that's fine.
Cool. Okay, we're now going to move along to the ag activity, and then we'll do weights and measures activity, and then we'll finally round up on pesticide activity. And then I'll come back at the very end and just show you the process of how the timesheets get submitted to supervisors and reviewed and approved. So for ag activity, we have, that's the next menu item over. Under agriculture, if we go to ag activities, this is a dashboard that tells you all of the ag activities, i.e. all of your ag dailies that you've filled out for this 2-week payroll period. We don't have any yet, so I'll just click on this new activity button. And this will let me start any type of activity in the system. Right now, the green ones are the ag activities. We're going to focus on those. And we have the familiar report 1 through 10 with all its different sub-reports. We don't have everything configured in here. I think you have some other reports that are enabled in production, but the production system should have every type of form that you may need to fill out. We have several new ones that we've developed that aren't official state forms yet, I don't think, but we do have an industrial hemp form. We have a cannabis form. We have some other forms that probably aren't relevant to San Mateo County for all of pest management, things like that. And then we also do have a Be Safe form, which is separate from your Report 10 apiary form. This training session is really about how to use CalCATS to enter the data. So I'll look at several of the forms, but I don't intend to cover how those forms should be filled out, because that would take, obviously a lot longer than the 2 hours we have scheduled for today. So we'll start with Pest Detection, and by clicking on that button, I'm telling the system I want to go fill out a Pest Detection Report 1 Ag Daily for today. So this is the anatomy of the Ag Daily forms. They all have the same layout, just the content here in the middle differs. At the top, I have the activity date. This is really important.
Like Pest Report 4, nobody will ever fill out a Pest Detection one, just something that they might be familiar with.
Absolutely, yep. Let's switch and go and do a report 4. Okay, so at the very top, we have the activity date. Most of the time, hopefully, you'll be entering your ag dailies at the end of the day, and so you'll be entering them for today. If you're like me and you like to come into work really early and do all the paperwork for the prior day, and I'm actually entering this data for December 7th, then you want to make sure you change that date before you save it. If you don't, then I'll show you how to move this activity form to a different day. But this activity date is the date that this activity is being entered for. Add new report, I won't cover yet until we actually fill out a report and save it. And then we have 3 mechanisms for classifying a given ag daily. I don't believe you're going to be using any of these 3, but just to communicate the concept to you, there are counties that, for example, have 2 different pest exclusion contracts. And so staff will enter an entry for a, contract number 1, and they'll save it, and they'll enter a second ag daily for that same day for contract number 2, and they'll save that. So the system has the capability of doing that, but you won't need to worry about doing that. So skip over this row, and then the middle part of the form here is very similar to how your screens were designed and implemented in the daily system from Santa Clara County. So we have a table of all your non-high risk inspections, and then we have a table of all the high risk pest exclusion activities. And then we have your origin certs, facility and properties, enforcement actions, program support activities. And then at the bottom of all the forms, we have a remarks field. So I'm hoping that that's pretty familiar territory to you. One thing that has always been a little bit of a source of confusion on this form for a lot of counties, and so we put a note in here, when you generate your report 4 to send to CDFA, the report is going to sum non-high risk and high risk inspections automatically where the type matches up. So let's do some example data entry. I went to 2 post offices. I looked at 20 shipments. I inspected 12 of them, 0 forwarded, 0 notice of rejection, 0 pest interceptions, and that took me 6 hours. Now, unlike the timesheet, where speed was of the essence, this does have a save button. So if I were to type this and I were to say, okay, I'm done, I'm going to go back to my timesheet, the system's going to pop up a little message to me saying, are you sure you want to leave? You haven't saved your changes yet. So now I'll say, oops, I forgot to hit the save button. So I'll hit cancel here and I'll hit save. And then I'll get a little pop-up that will tell me your report has been saved and now I'm good to go. You'll also notice that some additional buttons popped up now that I've saved this report. The first one is move this report to another date. So if I say, oops, I really meant to enter this for yesterday, then if I just change the date here to the 7th, then what's going to happen is the system is going to display my ag daily data for the 7th, which right now is empty because I didn't enter anything. So let me go back to the day we entered the data for. And if I want to move this existing report back to the 7th, I'll click on this button and it'll say, I need to correct this activity date to, and I'll put it in for tomorrow. Let me just change the setting on that program so I quit getting these irritating notifications. Okay, so I can, once I've entered and saved a report, I can change the date on it using this move report to another date. If I was just testing and I didn't really mean to enter this, or I want to get rid of this data for any other reason, I can hit delete this report. And if I say delete, then it'll wipe this out and my December 9th daily activity will be empty again. And at any time I can go and I can update this. So I don't need to click an edit button. I can just say, oh, I also went to a UPS. And actually I inspected both of them. I got 2 notices of rejection, 2 pest interceptions, and that was another 3 hour or 2 hours. That was my whole day. So you can always come back and add information to one of the forms until the timesheet that contains this day is sent to your supervisor. So let's illustrate that real quick, right? So I've entered my ag daily activity. If I go back to my ag activities dashboard, you'll see it's got my pest exclusion activity for Thursday, 8 hours worth. And if I go back to my timesheet, those 8 hours have been entered under the ag activity row for December 9th. I'll delete this one so we don't have too many hours. Now, if I go ahead and I say, all right, I'm done with this timesheet, obviously I'm not, I've got several more days to fill out. But if I were to say, okay, I'm done, I want to send this to my supervisor, then I'll send it to in review status. Now I can't make any changes. So if I try and type over these numbers, they're locked. And if I go back to my ag activities and I open up that pest exclusion report, it'll display it for me, but you notice the message up here, data entry is locked, timesheet is in review. Okay, so that's basically, you can update the information that's behind your timesheet up until the point that you submit your timesheet for review. Now I'll go back to my timesheet, and of course I'm in the system as an administrator, so I have permission to do everything. Normally your supervisor would have to do this, but I'm going to put my timesheet back in progress. And now if I go back to that ag activity, which I can get to here, or I can get to through the details on my timesheet, now it'll let me put in more entries. So in a case where your supervisor puts your timesheet back in review and says you need to update these forms, you won't be able to update them until your supervisor actually remembers to put your timesheet back into in progress status. Now I'll go back to ag activities. One thing that I always found annoying was having to click on this and search through these buttons. So we've created a way for you to generate a shortcut to the activities that you do most. So I'm going to introduce a new screen to you. If I click on where it says my username, San Mateo Calico Admin, for you it'll just say your first name and last name. We have a My Profile screen where you can set up various options for yourself. And one of them is this button up here, Manage Quick Actions. And on this screen, these are all the different activities that we track on our detailed forms. And if I mostly do, let's say, pest exclusion, and I do seed inspections, and I do apiary, I can check those 3 as my most common ag activities. And when I do that, now if I go back to any other screen, under my agriculture menu, I'll see those right here. Okay, so instead of having to navigate and click that button and look at all the green buttons, I can just click on, oh, seed inspection. I need to go enter some seed inspection data. And it'll take me right to the seed inspection form for today. We also, just trying to get as fancy as we could, you'll notice the new activity button now has a drop down. So it'll have your favorites in the new activity button, and then you can click view all activities if you need to go do a form that isn't in your favorites list. Okay, so some other, you probably don't do a whole lot of seed inspections, but one thing that you will find is in the old daily system, these forms were broken up into little pieces. So each one of these sections would be a different form that you had to navigate to. Hopefully, given that we put everything on one screen, this will make it easier for you to enter all the information for a given report number all at once and hit that save button. You will find that there's some places where we've added mileage. This isn't one of them, but there are some forms that other counties track miles on that you in Santa Clara County didn't. So you may see some new mileage fields, and I would recommend you just talk to your supervisor about whether your county wants you to fill those in. And then one last comment on this, and this may be more for the administrators in the crowd. There is two levels of charge that people get charged for using the system. One is for what we refer to as advanced users who fill out the daily forms. I just want to mention that if the only thing you use on this form is the administrative support row, then that user would not incur that second credit usage. So it is perfectly safe for your clerical staff to fill out Ag Daily forms just using the administrative support or clerical support categories, and they won't be charged an extra credit for the use of the Ag Daily forms. Okay, the last thing I would like to show you on Ag Activities is there are some new forms. So take a look, for example, at the Be Safe form, which most counties are having to use. This is something we work with Patricia Bowles over at CDFA on. Again, I'm not the expert on what the content is and how you should fill this form out, but just be aware that there are some new forms in here that were not part of the daily system you've been using. So I'll leave that up to your internal county policies as to how you fill those out. All right, back to our timesheet. Any questions about filling out Ag Daily forms? Good, and don't be shy about using the chat window as well, and I will round back up to
one thing, John, I noticed in the when you're the quick actions, there was POE stuff there, but so I was wondering what that was, because they're not active. Is that something that's going to be planned so they could be entered separately rather than in the way you're going to show us here soon?
Yeah, we're still working on those. Right now, you can kick off a weights and measures activity, and you can kick off an Ag activity from here. And maybe in the future, you'll be able to have it automatically open CalPETS and start a new inspection for you.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. So back to our timesheet, we've now talked about the Ag activity row, and we see how we get time accruing in there. Now let's talk about the weights and measures activities. As you know from being familiar with the daily, weights and measures is a little more detailed than Ag in that, in addition to tracking the activity that you perform, we are tracking the business owners and the business locations that you're doing your inspection work at. So under the weights and measures menu, we have several different entries here. I'll start with the dashboard. The dashboard looks very much like your Ag dashboard. This will give you a list of all the weights and measures inspections that you've done. And there's other ways to enter direct and indirect weights and measures support time. So this would list any time that you've put in on the weights and measures program. In order to get going here, we're going to want to enter a weights and measures inspection. That's what the equivalent in the weights and measures program is of the Ag Daily forms. And to get there, we want to go to a location device type. I think in the daily, this was called a business location device type, like BLT. I don't know why that stuck in my mind for some reason. So I'm just going to go through the hierarchy. The hierarchy is the same in CalCATS as it is in the daily, but with just a slight difference in the names. Because we needed to make this a little more generic for the whole state, the companies that own locations in your county are called businesses. So if I look at businesses, you'll see things like Arco, and you'll see things like Safeway and Vaughn's, but their address may be, a corporate headquarters address in San Francisco or in Texas or Pennsylvania or wherever that headquarters is. So looking at the business records, we'll see we have a business record form. It's a little more detailed than the owner form we had in the daily. So we track physical address, mailing address. This information is not required. What is required is if you choose to mail your invoices or certificates to the owner rather than the location, then you'll need to make sure you have an address, either a physical or a mailing address. It will preferentially choose the mailing address, and if that's not filled in, it will default back to the physical address. And then we have places for notes. We have a description and we have a county notes field. I know that you and I know Santa Clara has made a lot of use of these notes fields. So now you have owner notes as well as the location notes. And then to the very right over here, we have a locations button. When you use Google Maps and you search for something, it puts a little pin in the map, and this is kind of the icon for that pin. So we use that icon to be mnemonic of location. So if I look at this ARCO, it has one location, and if I click on the locations button, it will then show me for that business, here are all the locations. Now, over time, we may do some work, and in fact, even in production, we may have already done some work to make that relation a little more hierarchical. So ARCO might have one business that has whatever, a couple dozen locations. But as far as the location goes, we have a location information form, very similar to the business owner information form. We've got the physical address, we've got the mailing address, we've got the contact info, we've got the description and the location notes. These were all imported from the daily, so you should have that information available to you. We then have districts, business types, and very much like the daily, the districts can be used for a bunch of different things. There is a administrative setup screen where you manage your own districts. I'm not going to cover that in this training. That was in some administrator training that we've done. But it's a very flexible system for you to use to assign districts either by geographic location or by device type. We have flags to indicate weights and measures locations versus ag locations. This is for potential future use. If you do want to expand the level of detail you track your ag activities at, you can actually track ag activities at a specific location. Then we have a zone, which you're not using right now, but that's yet another classification mechanism that would help us when we're drawing maps. You'll see there is a centroid, longitude, and latitude, which if I wanted to locate this, so I don't think I have enough address information on this ARCO. Oh, maybe I do, yep. So I can click find on Google. So it found a location, a nice exact location. And if I want to see where that is, I'll click here and it'll take me over to Google Maps. And it will say that ARCO is right here. And that does indeed look like an ARCO station. So I could then save these coordinates and that would update them in here, and now that'll appear nicely on our map. Below that, we've got some ag information. You won't be using that initially, so later on, if you do have ag locations, you have the ability to track some ag information. And then back to weights and measures information. This is important for you, for those of you that will be responsible for maintaining these location records. We do allow you to track cab number, license plate, and VIN number. And all of these are searchable. So when you go searching for a location, either in the revenue ledger or when you're trying to do an inspection, these will be included in the search criteria. And then the familiar checkboxes for whether the invoice goes to the location or the headquarters, and same thing for the device registration certificate. Okay, so that's information about the location. Just so you're aware, we have two different permissions when it comes to viewing and editing location information. So some of your staff, some of you may be able to make changes to this information. Others of you may find that this is read-only for you. And that will be related to the permissions that are granted to your account. And then just like with the business, we had an icon at the very right to drill down into the locations. For a location, we have a button to drill down into subprograms and device types. But I'm going to switch to a different business before I do that. So let me clear out the business name and let's go look for a Safeway. So I'll pick this Safeway number 1138 on El Camino Real in Belmont. And let's go look at what device types they have. So here's that Safeway. Their account number, or their legacy ID, as we used to call it, is 1339. We have a physical address. We don't have a mailing address for them. We don't have any location notes. And they have 2 computing scales, 2 counter scales. Excuse me, that's district. 8 computing scales, 14 counter scales, 17 scanners. So they fall into PV greater than 9. And then they also participate in package audits. Some of the data that's in here may not be completely up to date, but the number inspected is the number of these devices that were marked as inspected on the last routine inspection. We do track number of vehicles. If the device type is a vehicle mounted type of device, then the number of vehicles will play into the device registration invoicing. So it's important to keep track of how many vehicles they have vehicle mounted devices attached to. The next inspection is, as you're familiar with, that's for the weights and measures planner. So that will define when we expect the next routine inspection to be done by. And then we have an active or inactive flag on the device type or inspection type for this location. As with all of our other grids, we have these buttons at the end of the row. So the first one is an edit button. That's what the pencil means. Again, this may be view only for some of you, but those of you who can update this, this is where you would update, for example, how many devices they have, when the next inspection date is due, and that type of thing. You'll notice here that we have a note under number of devices that the location device tracks devices individually. So instead of just saying they have 9 computing scales or whatever we're looking at here, yep, computing scales, you would actually need to click on Manage Devices, and that would give you the list of computing scales that they have at that location. And very similar to the daily, you can keep track of manufacturer model serial number and the location within the store. Okay, so that's all the information you can manage about the programs and inspection types are involved in. There is a trash can, which means delete this. The system will not let you delete it, obviously, because there's going to be inspection history for most of these, so it'll be rare that you'll be able to delete. But if I added a new device type and then I didn't mean to, I can use that delete button right away before anyone does any inspections for them. Then we have 2 extra icons at the end, and if I hover over them, they'll tell me what they do. So you notice we said that they manage these 8 devices individually, so the little shopping cart will give me those 8 device records. And if you do go down the path of tracking individual devices at locations, just a couple of notes about that. You can manage that information here. The inspector out in the field, if you've taken a laptop with you or you've got this running on an iPad or something out in the field, you can also manage this information in the field. So while you're out doing an inspection, you can update manufacturer model serial number and location. And then there will be cases where you have submetering, and this is what Santa Clara County is using this for, is submetering. They're keeping track of individual submeters. So you may have 50 of these records, and it's really not a lot of fun to use a web interface to enter 50 serial numbers. So we let you export these devices. If I click on export, that's going to give me an Excel file where I can then update manufacturer model serial number in Excel, which is a lot quicker. And then when I'm finished doing that, I can save that file and import it back into here, and it will update what's on the screen. So I'll leave it at that. That's not a feature I'm aware that you use a lot, but if you do go down the path of using that a lot, those features are available for you to manage the information here offline when you have a lot of devices to update. And then finally, the last button here, this used to be a green button that was at the other end of the row. And I think everyone hated having that green button over on the left. So this is now your device history, your inspection history. So it's a little clipboard looking thing to indicate inspections. And if I click on there, we'll see here are the historical inspections for this device type at this location. This is all data that's been imported from the daily. and it'll be a little more updated when we import it into production, but it gives you the same information. So January 14th, 2019, a routine inspection was done by Mark Melendez. He inspected 8 devices, 8 passed, none failed, no follow-up is due. And since no follow-up is due, no follow-up has been completed. It was 2.5 hours. Now on each inspection row, I have a pencil button, which will let me go and view that inspection. You'll notice that data entry is locked. So one thing about the weights and measures inspections is once an inspector enters an inspection, only that inspector or his supervisor or an administrator can modify that inspection data. So just be aware of that. And I am an administrator, but in order to modify Mark's inspection, I need to do an administrative thing before I can do that. I've shown Jeremy and others how to do that, so I don't think anyone else on the call needs to know. But just in the event that you're going to be out of town, you're going to be out of the office, be aware that your supervisor and the system administrator can go update your information for you. So I'm going to go back to our computing scale record, and I'm going to start a new inspection to show you how the inspection form works and how you'll enter your inspection data going forward. Again, like the Ag Daily forms, we tried to make it very similar to your current system, so it should be familiar territory. So I'm going to do a new inspection on the computing scales at the Safeway 1138, and we have inspection forms for device inspections, for price verifications, for package tests, for test purchases, for audits, petroleum inspections, weighmaster inspections, certification inspections, all the same inspection form types that you're used to. They all follow the same pattern. The top part of the inspection form tells you where you're at, what device type you're inspecting, how many devices the system thinks they have, and when the next routine inspection is due. And then the top part here is the inspection definition. Right above this, it'll tell you when was the most recent routine inspection. So the last time we had one in the system was 2019. Just FYI, nothing critically important. We have the date the inspection is occurring on. If you are using the paper forms to do your inspections and then transcribing the information into CalCATS, again, just be careful with that date to make sure you're entering for the right date. And then we do allow you to track the time of the inspection. That could be the start time or the end time, but it is optional. So you can choose if your county wants to track that. For the inspection reasons, these are very similar to what you're used to. We renamed initial inspections to routine inspections because a lot of counties were confused between initial as the inspection reason and initial as the device inspection type. So routine inspections are the one you do every year or every 10 years for your submeters. We have complaint inspections, which are the result of a complaint, and we do have a complaint form. When you fill out a complaint, if it has enough information, it will schedule an inspection within 60 days of the complaint date. So if you're doing a complaint inspection, you'll want to pick complaint. We have reinspection, which is the place and service inspection for red tags. And then we have 2 other general categories, other and survey, and those aren't attached to anything. They're not attached to a complaint or attached to a failed device or attached to rescheduling the routine inspection. So you can use those if you're doing some type of special project where you're inspecting things as part of an investigation or some other purpose. Now, let's go through these. The type of inspection that I pick is going to control some of the fields that I need to fill out for that inspection. So for a routine inspection, it's going to display the current inspection interval that's taken from the device types table, and it's going to tell you what the next inspection due date is going to be once you save this inspection. Okay, and that is editable. So the inspector has the ability to say, no, we want to move that out to January 31st. So you can change that. If you don't, it will calculate out as 12 months from this date. Now notice if I ignore that chain. Let's go back to other, and then I'll choose routine again. You'll notice that it's calculating it from the next inspection due. It's not 12 months from the date that I'm doing the inspection. That's the same logic that you have in the daily, so that shouldn't be a surprise to you, but that's a surprise to some other counties, so I just thought I'd point that out. So that's it for a routine inspection. If I choose a complaint inspection, then it wants me to pick a complaint out of the list of complaints that have been entered in the system. And we want to do that so we know that that complaint has been closed out. It's had an inspection done. Again, things you should be fairly familiar with, as the daily does it the same way. With a reinspection, it wants you to pick the original inspection where the failed device occurred. And then for survey and other, there's no other information that get collected. Okay, so we're going to do a routine inspection. That's one that resets this next inspection due. I'll leave it at January 14th, 2021. I know these dates have passed, but we're dealing with test data, so it's a little old. It will say who the inspector is. You can't change that and enter somebody else's inspection unless you have a special administrative permission. We have a place for entering consumer and other complaint numbers. Generally, they're going to be more important, excuse me, on complaint inspections, but they're available on routine inspections as well. The calculated next inspection date, need follow-up, which if you have a failed device will be required to be yes, and a follow-up date will set 30 days after the current inspection date. Follow-up completed will be filled in if a follow-up inspection has been done that identifies this inspection as the original red tag or failed inspection. Number of violations, number of service agent violations, whether a NOPA has been sent, the fine severity if one was issued, and then mileage. Okay, so that should all look very familiar, very similar to the same inspection header you have. All of the inspections have the same footer. There's a remarks area, and then there's a violations area. And just as you have right now, when you add a violation, we have a list of the BMP code sections. So if I look up scales, I'll find all the business and professions code sections for scales. We will have your, no, I take it back, we have Santa Clara's. If you give us your county ordinance broken up by ordinance reference number and title, we'll provide a lookup list for county ordinances. And then for the California Code of Regulations, we don't have that in a database. So that's one where you would put in, you know, the citation, and I forget the numbers, and then the title, and then your remarks. And everything you put in here and the violation details, you can enter multiple rows of violation details. Those will all print out on the inspection certificate.
John, real quick,
So
I think one thing to note, a difference between the daily and CalCATS is the search boxes are true keyword searches, not just first letter searches. So if you're searching for a business, you can just start typing an address and hit enter, and everything, it'll pop up. Or if you know the business name, you can do that. It doesn't have to be like start using a daily to find this. You have to type Safeway, then you have to search for pound 1138 or number 1138. But in the search function where you're going here, you can just go 1100 El Camino or 1100L, and you'll get options to pop up. See, all these ones are on 1100, and then it narrows it down. So it's much easier searching. You don't have to pull that pop-up location, the pop-up thing to search for addresses and stuff. It's much easier to find stuff. The
other nice thing about it is once you get a list, you can use the arrow key to arrow down. You don't have to reach for the mouse. And then when you find the one you want, you can just hit enter and it'll pick it for you. So yeah, lots of improvements in the overall interface. Okay, last part of the inspection form is the center part, and obviously that changes based on the inspection type you're doing. The operation of it is identical to what you use right now. So we have 8 devices we'll put in. These are all initial inspections, so we're going to do, 5 passed, 2 failed over, 1 failed other. It was a, labeling or a display readout issue. This took me 3.75 hours. And if I try and save this, just like the daily, it'll tell me you've got to do some things. I've got to say that needs a follow-up date. I have to provide a violation count. If I put in 2 violations, it's going to say, yep, you got your 2 violations, and I got to go put my violations in here. So I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on there unless you have questions. Again, just as the daily operates, if instead of entering these overall results, I want to enter results for each scale, then I will say enter individual devices, and it will switch over to this table where I can enter, this is initial inspection and it passed, this was an initial inspection, it failed over, and so forth. Okay. So as I enter that, it will update my summary table here, and then I'll put in my total hours. You remove that, and I'll just go back to my summary. So we had 5, 2 failed over, 1 failed other, and I will save that. And now when I go back to my inspection history, so a couple of quickie links here. I can go back to the inspection history for computing scales by clicking on computing scale, or I can jump all the way back to the business record, the location record, by clicking on the location name. We'll see I now have my latest inspection results in here. 8 inspected, 5 passed, 3 failed, a follow-up date. And the next inspection due has been reset, as we said on the inspection, to January 14th, 2021.
So
now there is a new feature.
Within it, and maybe you're about to talk about the export.
Yep.
Within it, I see that you have an export that actually pulls up an inspection certificate.
Yes.
In preparation for some mobile inspection stuff. Yep.
So let me jump back to our Safeway. And I'm also today, in addition to inspecting their computing scales, I inspected their counter scales. So I'm going to go real quick and enter a counter scale inspection. It was, again, a routine inspection. They have 14 devices, all 14 passed. No violations, no severity. I would put in my miles if I had them, and that took me 4 hours. Now, if I go either to this inspection or I go back to my computing scale inspection, all of the inspection types, most of the inspection types have the ability to export an inspection certificate. And we have both a PDF version, which if you're out in the field and want to email it to someone or airdrop it, or if you have a mobile printer and you want to send it to a printer and have them sign it right there, you can use the PDF. We produced an Excel version of it because sometimes if you're doing this in the office, it can be helpful to have it in Excel because you can do more control over the printing format that way. But on the certificate, it will generate a PDF and let you download it. And you'll notice, you know, we've got both the computing scale and the counter scale inspections on here. So it will include all device inspections for this location completed on this date. If we were doing retail motor fuel and we had fuel return to storage, it would add that detail there. And then if we had entered some code sections and remarks for violations, those would be included here. And then we have a spot for them to write their name and sign it. Okay, so that's kind of a new feature that was not available in the daily that we have added to CalCATS, is the ability to generate these certificates. Obviously, everything like that, the certificates, the device registration invoices, the templates for the registration certificates can be customized, Jeremy. So you just be aware that over time, if you want to tweak those and you know, add your county seal and things to them, we can work on that with you.
That's good.
Okay. Let's look at a non-device inspection. So I'll go back to my Safeway, and you'll see they also have package audits. So if I want to go do a new package audit inspection, we'll see a form that's very similar, but the middle section is laid out differently. So different information that we collect on package audit results. We've got the audit section, the package inspections, and the labeling action sections. I'm going to stop there because honestly, these forms have been mimicked identically from the daily. So there should be nothing here that doesn't operate the same way that you've been operating up until now. Okay, so we've done a couple of inspections today. Let's go back to my timesheet and we'll see that under weights and measures activity for today, it's added up all of my weights and measures inspections and said I had a total of 7 3/4 hours of activity for today. And just like I showed you with the ag activity, I can double click in that cell. It will tell me the inspections that I did. And if I need to go edit one of those inspections, I can go edit it directly from here and it will take me to that inspection form to work on it. So that wraps up 2 more of our timesheet row entry types, the ag activity and the weights and measures activity. And the last one is pesticide activity. So we integrate CalCATS with CalPEATS. I'm going to go ahead and log into the CalPEATS system. And I have an account called Calico41 that is for San Mateo County. And for those of you familiar with CalPEATS, you won't see much of a difference in here. But the place you will see a difference is if I start a new inspection, I'll do a use monitoring inspection. Over in our little list of all the information blocks that are part of the inspection, you'll see a new one called time entry. And this is a section that's only turned on for counties that are participating in CalCATS. And in here, you'll have a place to put in time entries for your inspection work. So I'm going out to do a pesticide use monitoring inspection. I'm actually going to, assume that this is an inspection that we're doing today. And I will add 2 hours. For pesticide use inspections, we allow you to track mileage, but no counties are doing it right now because they're really not interested in charging, or they don't get to charge mileage or anything like that. But I would put in here field time performing inspection. And so now I have 2 hours of field time performing that inspection. Now that time is in the background going to automatically transfer from CalPEATS over to CalCATS. And it's a synchronization process that happens and it's not instantaneous. So just so you're aware, it can take up to 2 minutes for the time to transfer over. Once it's transferred over, I will expect to see it appear on this pesticide activity row. So let's see if it arrived yet. Bingo, there we go. So you'll see magically, I didn't touch my timesheet, but 2 hours appeared on it. And if I want to know what that 2 hours is, if I click on the row, it tells me double click for details. So I'll double click in there and it says, oh, here you go. You did inspection number 104-41-21W00002. And there were 2 hours on it. And if you want to go look at it, click the pencil icon and it will open up CalPEATS for you. It might ask you to log in if you're not already logged in, and it will take you directly to that inspection. Okay, so doing time, it sounds like you're in jail. Entering time for PUE activities is very much like entering time for ag activities and for weights and measures activities. Each of the forms that you use in CalPEATS, the inspection forms, the investigation forms, the enforcement response and compliance action forms, they all have this same time entry widget. Now, one nice thing about the time entry widget in CalPEATS is not only I could enter another time entry here, and let's say I'm going to put in an hour tomorrow for completing inspection report in office. So the next day I took an hour and finished up my inspection report in the office. And now I have 3 hours total on the inspection. And again, when I go back over to my timesheet, we'll see an hour entered for December 9th. And then there's another dimension, which, as you know, in CalPEATS, generally when you finish an inspection, you submit it to your supervisor for review. When the supervisor logs in to review this inspection, the supervisor can add their time to the inspection record as well. So it's not restricted to just the inspector recording time there. The supervisor can record the time, and then that time will transfer over to CalCATS onto the supervisor's timesheet. So there is one thing you have to do to make all of this auto magic happen, and it is on your profile screen. So I'm going to take you back to the My Profile button that's under your login menu here. And down at the bottom here, you'll see CalPETS Connection Management. So the magic sauce that makes that synchronization work is we tell CalCATS who you log into CalPETS as, what your user ID is. So what you're going to do is this box will be empty when you log into your CalCATS account, and you'll click on a button that says Connect CalPETS Account. And it'll pop up a box that asks you to enter your CalPETS user ID and password. And you'll click that and it will say it's successful unless you type in the wrong password. And then you'll see your CalPETS user ID displayed here. Once that's done, all the rest of the synchronization will happen for you in the background. Okay, I want to show you in CalPETS. So I've mentioned that time widget is available on inspections and investigations. Let's start an investigation. There was an incident on the 1st. And I start my investigation record, and bingo, you'll see a time entry widget, and it works exactly the same way. So I'll just type add, I'll put in my hours and remarks, and the remarks transfer over to CalCATS as well as the time entry. So I'm not going to repeat that and show you all the enforcement response forms. They're all identical. You'll see a time entry and link over on the right, and a time entry widget looks just like this. The one that is a little different is training and outreach. So all of this time is entered on those forms. With training and outreach, what happens is a training and outreach session will be entered. So let's say we did a training session for growers on the 2nd. I need to put in all this information. So it was at 10 a.m. The topic was, or regulatory update. We have an approved GPR meeting code. Location was in San Mateo. It was 2 hours. We had 10 growers attend, and they got 1 hour of CE credit. We gave it in English. Well, I guess it doesn't like my time. So we'll pick it from here, 10 a.m. So now that we have the session defined, now everyone who is involved in that session can use the time entry widget here. So it's just a little bit of a different process to get the time entered. Once I click on that, you'll see the same familiar time entry widget, and everyone who is involved in preparing or doing the training can book their time to that training session here, and it will show up in CalCATS, and it will show up on your Payroll Report under the training and outreach hours category. So that's it on CalPETS. Time entry in there, it's fairly simple. And the one last thing I will mention about it is possible to get sideways a little bit with the synchronization between CalPETS and CalCATS. And here are the 2 ways that you can create an error in that synchronization. As you can imagine, the first way I can do it is if I submit my timesheet to my supervisor, so now it's locked and can't make any changes. Then I go log into CalPETS and I enter some more time for this time period. So that creates a problem because the time is in CalPETS, but when CalPETS tries to send it over, CalCATS says, nope, that timesheet's locked. I can't accept that time. The other way that you can get sideways is if one of you goes and logs into CalPETS and enters time on inspections, but you've forgotten to link up your account right here. And the solution to that one's very easy. Just go link up your account, and then all the time that you've entered in CalPETS will be synchronized over. For those of you who are identified as supervisors in the system, if any of those conditions happen, if there are any problems with the synchronization, you'll get a message on your dashboard right here in this top right section. And there is a, where did it go? Oh, I guess I don't have any conflicts. If there are some conflicts, you'll have an entry under the admin menu that will tell you all the details you need to resolve those conflicts and how to resolve them. So that's the last thing to talk about on the CalPETS time integration. Okay. I'm going to pause and answer Joseph's question. Joseph had a question in the chat, which is where to place mileage. So on the weights and measure side, you saw the mileage field is on the inspection header, just like it is in the daily. With the ag activities, for those activities that do track mileage, I think nursery inspections do, you will find mileage fields. Oh, maybe they don't. Let's go look at.
Go to Pierce's disease.
Sorry, which one does?
Pierce's disease.
I couldn't quite hear you there.
Pierce's disease.
Oh, Pierce's does?
Yeah.
So when you go to a Pierce's form, then yeah, then it'll have the mileage for you to enter into the form. So we have that under trapping, and then I'm just scanning through the form. Yep, then we've got it down here under other activities. And then for non-activity records, and I'll just mention this, I'm not sure if you'll have any, but when I go look at, for example, the white garden snail form or the clerical indirect form, your county administrator can specify whether you want to add mileage as a column here to track as well. So if for one of these, special custom forms that your county has put up, if they want you to track mileage, they'll put up a mileage form here. So 2 questions from my own. The first is for training sessions for the prep, we need to enter the training session first for any biologist to add time. That is correct, yep. So if you have the prep time you want on your timesheet before the training session occurs, you'll just put in that training session with a future training session date. CalCATS is not concerned about the date on the training session. It's concerned with the date on the time entries. And then what about mileage for PUE when there's surveillance but no inspection? So with the PUE time entry, since if you're not doing an inspection, you won't be entering that time on an inspection form. There are a whole series of other Kramer categories. And I didn't really mention those because they're part of the configuration. But if you look here, we have RMP Ag and RMP Non-Ag. There's also, in general, and you will have in your production system, a timesheet row called surveillance. And when you enter that time, we can make that a simple entry form and track mileage there. So that would be entered not in CalPETS as an inspection, but it would be entered in CalCATS directly on the surveillance row. Okay, so the last 2 things that I would like to cover. First is we haven't talked about reporting very much. So we've talked about how to get data into the system. Let's take a brief look at various ways to get data out of the system. Under our reports menu, we have 3 categories of reports that I think will be most useful for the folks that are on the call today. The first is the ag reports. These are reports 1 through 10, plus some of the custom forms that we've created. So if I wanted to run a pest exclusion report, I can choose pest exclusion. I can choose which users I want to run it for. I'm going to run it for everybody. I can limit it to contracts. You're not using the contracts right now, so I don't need to do that. And then I can run it either for a particular start and end date. I can pick a month and year, or I can say run it for a fiscal year. So let's run this report for 21-22. And that is going to generate for me a PDF report that looks very much like the printed reports that come out of your system now. So this is what you would generate to send off to CDFA for your report for, with the comments all attached at the end. Just FYI, we're working on a version of this that will export to Excel in much more of a tabular format. Because I don't really like those PDF forms. They're not particularly useful for your internal use if you're auditing, time in a program. So just be aware that we're aware of that and that we're working on a new feature to make it easier to use. So that's how you'll generate your monthly reports for the CMR to CDFA, but also you can run those for an individual user or for a group of users and for a shorter time period, for whatever purpose you might find that useful. The second category of reports is our weights and measures reports. This is where you'll generate your county monthly and county annual reports. Right now, I'll just take a quick look at the county monthly report. It's by far the most interesting one as far as tracking time goes. Again, you can run it for any user, any group of users. This is a multiple select, so I could select some individuals to run this for, or I can just say I want to run it for all users. And again, I can pick a time frame. I can pick a month and year, or I can pick a fiscal year. Obviously, when you're reporting to DMS, you'll be running it each month. This one, rather than giving you a PDF, it will give you an Excel file, and the Excel file has a lot in it. I'm not going to go through all of it because we've gone through a lot of it for auditing and supervisory purposes, but anyone that wants to look at what your time looks like on the CMR, you can run this report. We have the familiar page 1 and page 2 sections that sum everything up. And page 2 has all of the device details and then the QC program details at the bottom and petroleum and weighmaster. But then we have a whole series of other tabs, and these tabs contain the raw data that go into these counts. So for example, when I see there are 5 initial inspections on electric submeters, if I go over to device inspections, I can filter this and go look for electric submeters, and it will give me those individual inspection records. So way more detail than you've had in the past, and I think that'll be useful, not only for auditing the report to make sure it's correct before you send it into DMS, but just also for your own purposes. If you want to see what your work is, you can filter the report just to you and go look at all the raw data for the work that you've done. There is also a new section, a couple of new sections on here, which is additional program direct hours and indirect time allocation. Just like on the annual financial summary, we have an allocation procedure for weights and measures time, where if you bill indirect time, it will get allocated to the different subprograms and weights according to the ratio of direct hours. So that's just something to be aware of. And when I mentioned the audit report, and I said, oh, on the audit report, there's a CMR destination column. That column is describing where the time will end up on this report. So it'll either end up on page 2 in the device hours, or the QC Weighmaster Petroleum section hours, or it'll end up in this allocation if it's totally indirect, and it'll go right here. Or it'll end up in this program direct hours if you bill time to devices, but it's not to a specific device type. And then finally, it can end up in this support category if it's classified as weights and measures support time. And that audit report will tell you exactly which of those spots your time is going to end up in. Okay, and then the third category of useful report really is that time audit report. The time codes report, custom tracking, these are more at an administrative level, so I don't feel we need to cover those today. But the time audit report, we've looked at it when I run it from my timesheet, which just gives me my time. But here I could run all users for a month, and that will give me that same report, but it'll give it, this may end up being empty. I don't know when we have time in. Oh no, we got a bunch of time in here. So this gives me all of the time that was recorded for the whole county for the month of wherever that is, April 2021. And I can see all those details. So a lot of detail for the weights and measures inspections. It gives you the location, the device type, and then for CMR, it shows, oh, these are all going to end up in device hours because they were device inspections. Okay, well, that rounds up the training agenda. I promised to wrap it up in under 2 hours, and we have done so. We've got time for additional questions, or if there's any areas that I went a little too quickly over, I'll be happy to go back and cover them again. So I'll open up the floor to questions.
I don't hear any questions, but I just kind of want to bring up, because I think everything is pretty straightforward. But I put in our Teams chat a snippet, screen clipping of the production site with all the PUE stuff in there. So all the other pesticide stuff that's not in CalCATS, all those hours, NOI review, surveillance, restricted material stuff, PUR data entry, those are all in the timesheet, and those hours will be put in the timesheet, and then it maps it to report 5 and sends that to CalCATS, correct?
That is correct, yep.
Okay. So they all should be mapped, and we'll double check. They should be mapped to the correct parameter part on report 5. So a huge amount of your PUE hours are going to be entered on the timesheet, not in a report 5 template like we're used to, even though it's all through drop-down menus.
That is correct for now. Yep. So these are the PUE time categories, and these do feed information back to CalCATS for the purpose of reporting the parameter to DPR. Yeah, and that's how it'll be for a little while. We're going to make some changes to that down in the future, but for now, if you are used to going to a report 5 form and entering pesticide support or entering PUR data entry licensed hours, or whatever other PUE time would end up on report 5, you'll see that on your timesheet as a row, and they're all straight entries. So you'll be able to just type in restricted materials permitting ag, just go to that row on the timesheet and enter 5 hours or 8 hours or whatever time you spent issuing permits, restricted materials permits for ag permits for that day.
And this is also why we're now going to start doing all NOIs through CalAg permits. So we can collect those numbers in CalAg permits, because there's really no place to collect the number of NOIs approved or business registrations. There's no place to report that in CalCATS. That's all going to be pulled from CalAg permits.
That is correct. Yep. So if I go to your current CalCATS, and this is a nice way for us to verify that we have all the timesheet categories set up, because I noticed there's some on there that I don't see. So we may need to set up a few more in your production system. Calco admin 41. And if I go to Ion's favorite screen, you'll see that, yeah, there are still a few hours categories in here. So all these ones that say hours should disappear once we turn on your CalCATS connection. And you'll end up with a separate category in here that says CalCATS entry only. Which, Jeremy, I assume if you had sufficient time to look over the historical data importer sheet, you and I have a separate call to talk about that and to plan the actual production transition.
Yeah, we need to do that pretty quickly.
Yep.
And I think everything's pretty much good. It's just, I don't have to be involved in it to double check to make sure all the report 5 entries are there on the timesheet for us to put in.
Okay. Well, I have lots of time set aside tomorrow and Friday. So if you have availability, let's just let me know when you'd like to get together on that, and I'll walk through it with you.
Okay, it'd probably be Friday, but maybe tomorrow, because I am off on Friday. We'll discuss it.
Yep. And Ion, I see your question in the chat message. Yeah, there are some time entry rows. There's a lot missing in the test system. I wanted to have a nice short timesheet for the training purposes. In the production system right now, I do see there are some missing report 5 categories in there that we'll need to add before we transition you into the production system. Okay, barring any other questions, I will wrap up the training session. Thanks everyone for giving me, close to 2 hours of your time. There is a help desk and help@calcats.org. So it follows the same pattern as all the other help desks that we have for you. Feel free to email us on that. We'll get back to you. And your neighbors to the north are going to be going through this process very shortly as well. So you'll have some common ground to talk about. And there are several other counties that have been through this process, and in particular right now are generating their device registration invoices for next year. So soon we should have a users group and a committee in CACASA to kind of manage the process and more help resources. But for now, we are at help@calcats.org. Don't hesitate to shoot us an email and we'll help you through the process as you get going.
Sounds good. And also, I know I've said this before when I set the links, go to the videos. If you go to the help tab on the test site or the production site, which none of you have logins to the production site yet, we'll get you those. There's lots and lots of videos to watch.
Yep, we've been organizing the videos a little bit and getting the newer ones up to the top of the list. There is also an online user guide that we update fairly frequently. The release notes are important because this being a new system, we do introduce bug fixes very frequently as we find them. And we are introducing new features as we go along, as counties that have been through implementation ask for certain things that will speed up their workflow significantly. So things like the Excel-based ag reports, things like a more efficient report 5 entry screen, those will appear from time to time. When you log into the system, if there's been a new release since the last time you logged in, it will pop up a dialog to you when you first log in. You might get used to just clicking out of that because you got something urgent you need to do, but do come back to this help screen and look at these, recent releases, because sometimes there'll be a major feature in here, like there'll be a link that says details provided in this document, and that'll give you like a, specific instructions on how to use the new feature. So we're relying a lot on these release notes and on the help screen for communication purposes.